Why would a wounded woman sit alone in a forgotten bunker, waiting for armed men to arrive? The bunker smelled like cold concrete and old secrets, the kind of smell that seeps into stone and never truly leaves. Orange emergency lights ran along the floor, thin glowing lines cutting through the darkness, enough to see shapes, not enough to feel safe. 6 men moved down the narrow staircase in tight formation. They were professionals, Navy SEAL reconnaissance operators, the kind of men who had practiced this exact entry 1,000 times in training houses and real places where mistakes cost lives. Captain Miles Hargrove led them. Weapons raised, boots silent against concrete, every movement precise. They were halfway down the stairs when Nathan Reeves stopped. Not slowly. Abruptly. So abruptly that the man behind him bumped into his back. Reeves wasn't reacting to danger, no sudden movement, no hidden gunfire. He had seen something else. The orange light spilled across the center of the room, illuminating the face of a woman sitting on the floor. And Reeves knew that face. Not from the field. From a photograph. A classified photograph he had once been shown in a hotel room in Bucharest. A man in civilian clothes had placed the file on the table. Confirm this is the individual who will be in the vehicle tomorrow. Reeves had confirmed it. He believed it was a surveillance operation. He had never asked questions. Now that same woman sat 20 feet away from him. Alive. And looking directly at him. The team spread into the bunker carefully. 30 feet across, bare walls, rusted secondary door, a single support beam. And in the center of the room sat the woman. Small, maybe 5'4". Dark hair tied back. A faded gray thermal shirt. Her left leg ended just below the knee. A carbon fiber prosthetic lay beside her on the concrete. Across her lap rested a Remington 700 rifle. Not aimed. Just resting in her hands with the quiet familiarity of someone who had held it thousands of times. In front of her sat a titanium hard case, scratched, dented, locked with both biometric and code authentication. 6 rifles pointed at her. She didn't look afraid. She looked patient. Like a chess player waiting for the other side to realize the game was already over. She spoke calmly. You took 49 minutes from the perimeter. A pause. I estimated 45. I'll adjust my model. No one moved. Hargrove lowered his rifle 2 degrees. Hands. She raised her left hand slowly. Her right hand stayed resting near the rifle. I can show you both, she said quietly. But it won't be pleasant for anyone in this room. Behind Hargrove, Sergeant Derek Briggs shifted slightly. Across the staircase, Reeves still hadn't moved. Because he remembered the photograph. And the operation that followed. Hargrove looked at him. Reeves's expression wasn't tactical calculation. It was recognition. And guilt. The woman in the bunker was named Sloane Carter. And before anyone could understand why she was sitting here with a rifle and a case full of secrets powerful men would kill to bury, they needed to understand where she came from and why she had been preparing for this moment for nearly 20 years. Because nothing about tonight was an accident. Every variable had been calculated, including the 49 minutes it would take 6 operators to reach her once she triggered the perimeter alarm herself. But that story started far from Idaho. It started in Tennessee, with a man named Glenn Carter, and a promise that would shape his daughter's entire life. On a hot Saturday morning in 2010, Glenn Carter carried a rifle into his backyard and handed it to his 12-year-old daughter. Sloane had never seen her father move slowly before. He had once been a big man, wide shoulders, hands like iron tools. But the war had taken something from him. His lungs first, a persistent cough that never went away. Doctors eventually called it Gulf War illness, one of thousands of veterans whose bodies had absorbed something the government could never fully explain. The sickness worked slowly, which meant Glenn Carter had time to think and time to prepare. He didn't tell Sloan everything that morning. He simply showed her how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to be still. Your body will lie to you, he told her quietly. Your heartbeat will rush, your hands will shake. He tapped the rifle gently. This doesn't care about any of that. He taught her bullet drop, wind drift, patience, every Saturday for 2 years. Sometimes in the yard, sometimes at the kitchen table when his lungs hurt too much to stand. He never spoke directly about the war. Sometimes he would start a sentence about Kuwait, then stop. Veterans often carry silence the way other people carry memories. But Sloan learned something more important than stories. Muscle memory, the kind that lives deeper than thought. Hands that knew what to do before the brain finished deciding. Glenn Carter died in the spring of 2012. Sloan was 14. The night after the funeral, her mother sat at the kitchen table, exhausted from grief. For the first time, Sloan saw her cry. When she finished, Ruth Carter took her daughter's hands. "Promise me something." Sloan nodded. "Promise me you'll never touch a gun again." It wasn't anger. It was fear. A woman who had watched war slowly steal her husband piece by piece. Sloan promised, and she meant it. At 18, she joined the Navy. Not combat, medicine. She trained as a corpsman, healing instead of harming. The same steady hands her father had trained now closed wounds instead of firing bullets. She became exceptional, quiet, focused, precise. After 4 years, a recruiter from Special Operations Command approached her. A new intelligence support pipeline, field exposure, high-level analysis. Few people were invited. Sloan Carter scored in the top 3% of every assessment. She said yes. Less than a year later, they sent her to northern Romania. And that mission would cost her a leg. Officially, the file said, motor vehicle accident during training. But the file ended too cleanly. No investigation. No follow-up. Just a closed door. Captain Hargrove noticed that detail the first day Sloan arrived at Fob Re-Dern. She stepped out of the transport truck carrying a deployment bag and a titanium case no one noticed. Sergeant Briggs noticed something else immediately. 5'4", one prosthetic leg. Fantastic, he muttered under his breath. They sent us a doc. Sloan heard him. She didn't react. Instead, she quietly reorganized the team's medical kit, adding a second tourniquet, combat gauze, a decompression needle. Briggs watched. Webb watched more carefully. Chief Warrant Officer Clifton Webb had spent 22 years in reconnaissance. He didn't talk much, but he noticed things, like the tourniquet placement in Sloan's pocket, optimized for a left-handed emergency draw. Someone had practiced that under stress. Many times. He didn't say anything. Not yet. The first patrol was simple. 6 kilometers. No expected contact. 3 kilometers in, Cody Marsh slowed slightly. Young operator, good soldier. But dehydrated. No one noticed. Except Sloan. Reaction time delayed by half a second. She walked beside him casually. "How much water this morning?" He answered. She did the math instantly. 40% short. She called a casual water break, moved him to shade, rehydrated him quietly. Briggs watched. "Lucky catch," he said later. Webb said nothing. But that night something else happened. Sloan picked up Webb's M24 sniper rifle from the equipment table, just to look through the optic. Normal enough. Then she rotated the elevation turret 3 clicks, adjusted parallax, settled the rifle into her shoulder. Her breathing slowed. Controlled. Professional. 2 seconds later, she put the rifle down and walked away. Webb stared at the weapon for a long time, because that wasn't how amateurs handled rifles. That was how trained shooters did. Hargrove had seen it too. Later that night, Sloan opened a small case inside her bunk. Inside was a photograph. 8 men standing in desert uniforms under the Kuwait sun. Her father stood in the center. On the back of the photo, Glenn Carter had written something in pen. "Truth weighs more than silence, but you carry it when the time is right." Sloan had been carrying it for 12 years. And tonight, the time had finally arrived. Because while the SEAL team slept, Sloan listened to a radio transmission on a CIA tactical frequency. 32 words. A grid coordinate. An arrival time. And a phrase used when an operation was not meant to leave survivors. She stood up immediately, pulled the titanium case from her bag, slung her father's rifle over her shoulder. She had studied the base map carefully, especially the structures that weren't officially listed, like the old bunker beneath the eastern ridge. 12 feet underground. Concrete thick enough to block signals. Perfect. 15 minutes later, she sat on the bunker floor, removed her prosthetic, placed the rifle across her lap, started an encrypted upload from the device hidden inside the case. Then she triggered the perimeter sensor herself and waited. 49 minutes later, 6 SEAL operators came down the stairs, and the truth she had carried for half her life was almost ready to surface. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it simply waits in the dark, holding the weight of truth until the world is finally forced to see it. What kind of medic asks for a sniper rifle while a man bleeds beside her? The second patrol had barely reached the ridge when the first shot cracked across the rocks. It came from the east, not the south where the intelligence report had predicted. Captain Hargrove heard the round strike stone before he fully registered the direction. A sharp metallic crack against granite, the kind of sound that makes trained soldiers move before they think. "Contact east," Briggs shouted. The second round found Cody Marsh. It hit high on his right thigh. Marsh didn't scream. His body forced the air out of his lungs in a sharp breath as he dropped hard against the trail. Training made him try to stand again immediately. Briggs was already dragging him behind a rock formation. Sloan Carter was moving before the dust settled. Low, fast, controlled. She reached Marsh in seconds, sliding into position beside him with the calm efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Don't move," she said quietly. Her voice cut through the chaos. She cut his pant leg open with trauma shears from her cargo pocket. The wound was high on the inner thigh. That location meant one thing above everything else: the femoral artery. If that artery was compromised, Marsh could bleed out in less than 2 minutes. Sloane's hands moved quickly but without panic. Pressure versed. Her fingers felt the wound channel, measuring bleed rate, depth, pulse. She ran 3 assessments simultaneously. Color of the blood, strength of distal pulse, flow pattern. The artery wasn't severed, but it was close enough to be dangerous. She had a tourniquet wrapped around his leg in 41 seconds. "Talk to me," she said. Marsh nodded weakly. "I'm good." "You're going to stay good," Sloane replied. Her tone wasn't encouraging. It was factual. Gunfire snapped over the rocks again. The shooter was patient. One round every few seconds. Someone experienced. Hargrove's voice came over the radio. "Positions." Briggs responded immediately. "Pinned west side rock." Webb's voice followed from the drainage cut north of them. "No angle from here." Hargrove was stuck behind a narrow boulder that barely covered him. And the shooter had elevation. 700 meters. Maybe more. Sloane looked toward Webb's position. The M24 sniper rifle lay on the ground beside him. But Webb couldn't reach it without exposing himself. She glanced back at Marsh. His pulse was steady. The tourniquet was holding. He was stable for the next few minutes. She made the decision quickly. 90 seconds, she said. Briggs looked at her. "For what?" She nodded toward the rifle. "Give me that weapon." Briggs stared at her like she had said something absurd. "You're a medic." She was already moving. Sloane crawled 12 feet along the rock line, staying below the natural cover. She reached Webb's rifle and pulled it close. The weight settled naturally into her hands. Like a memory. She made 2 quick adjustments to the turret. Not reading the numbers. Just feeling the clicks. Her father's voice echoed somewhere deep in her mind. "Wind lies to beginners. Trust what the grass tells you." She settled into the prone position. Left elbow anchored. Cheek against the stock. Breathe. 4 seconds in. Hold. 8 seconds out. The scope cleared. 780 meters. She spotted the shooter. A shallow depression behind a granite outcrop. Professional position. Wind from the northwest. 8 knots here. Probably 12 on the ridge. She adjusted. Squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked gently against her shoulder. The round struck just left. The shooter shifted. Near miss. Good enough. She worked the bolt calmly. No rush. Her father had drilled that into her. Hurry ruins the second shot. She adjusted windage slightly. Reacquired the position. The enemy shooter had lowered his head further behind the rock. That actually gave her a better angle. She breathed again. Squeezed. The second round flew. 780 meters away, the ridge line went still. No movement. No follow-up shot. Nothing. Sloane kept the scope on target for 4 seconds. Then she set the rifle down and crawled back to Marsh. She checked the tourniquet. Checked his pulse. Took his blood pressure. Wrote the time directly on his forearm with a surgical marker. "How's the pain?" "Still there," Marsh muttered. "Good," she said. "Pain means you're alive." Only then did Sloane notice something unusual. Silence. The entire team was watching her. Briggs stood 6 feet away, staring like he had just seen something he didn't understand. Webb had emerged from the drainage cut. His eyes moved slowly from the ridge to the rifle to Sloane. Captain Hargrove approached last. He looked at the distant ridge. Then back at her. "Where did you learn that?" Sloane kept working. "My father taught me." That was all she said. Hargrove waited. She didn't add anything. The walk back to the fob was quiet. Webb helped carry Marsh. Briggs didn't make a single sarcastic comment the entire time. That evening, the team gathered for debrief. Marsh was stable. The base doctor confirmed Sloane's treatment had likely saved his leg. Possibly his life. But that wasn't what everyone was thinking about. Webb left the room early. 22 years in reconnaissance had given him access to systems most operators didn't even know existed. He pulled Sloan Carter's service record. Everything was normal at first. Navy corpsman, 2 deployments, outstanding performance reviews. Then the SOCOM pipeline, top-tier scores. Then Romania. And the file ended abruptly. Medical separation. Cause training accident. No incident report. No investigation. No follow-up documentation. Just one classified line. Webb leaned back in his chair. In his experience, when a military file ended that cleanly, it meant someone had erased the rest. Later that night, he found Sloan alone in the equipment room. She was checking her medical kit. Calm. Precise. Romania, Webb said. She didn't look surprised. What did the file say? Motor vehicle accident. She nodded. That's what it says. Webb watched her carefully. What really happened? Sloan paused. Not because she was deciding whether to speak. Because she was deciding where to begin. My father, she said quietly. You have to start there. Webb leaned back. And Sloan Carter began telling him a story that had started 30 years earlier in the deserts of Iraq. In January 1991, 8 Delta Force operators crossed the Iraqi border on a reconnaissance mission. Among them was Glenn Carter. Their task was simple: confirm a suspected chemical weapons facility. What they found was something else entirely. Inside a nearby structure, 3 American civilians sat at a table with 2 Iraqi officials. Documents covered the surface: oil contracts, post-war development agreements, and a briefcase full of American cash. The conversation was easy to understand. Private American interests were negotiating oil rights before the war had even ended, using information only certain U.S. officials should have possessed. Glenn Carter's team reported it up the chain. They waited for instructions. 6 hours later, their position was compromised. The attack came with precision. Someone knew exactly where they were. 7 men died in the desert that night. Only Glenn Carter survived. He escaped because of terrain, and because he stayed motionless under a rock formation for 9 hours while enemy forces searched the area. Before he fled, Glenn took something from the facility. A hard case. Inside were documents. Proof of the entire meeting. Proof of who had authorized it. He brought the case home. He reported everything. The military buried it. No investigation. No arrests. Just 7 funerals. Glenn Carter kept the case. For 21 years. Not because he had a plan. Because it was the only piece of truth no one else controlled. When his illness worsened, he told Sloan where to find it. She was 14, and she carried that burden quietly for 12 years. Webb sat very still. Romania, he said slowly. She nodded. Someone realized I knew the case existed. And they tried to remove you. Yes. Webb studied her prosthetic leg. They took the leg. They tried to take everything. He leaned forward. And the case? Sloan looked at him calmly. Close. She didn't elaborate. Webb didn't push. Because some truth needed the right moment to surface. But both of them understood something now. The sniper on the ridge. The strange radio transmissions. The sealed military files. None of it was random. Something much larger was already moving toward them. And Sloan Carter had been preparing for it for 3 years. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a rifle. It's the truth someone refused to bury. Why would someone open fire on a reconnaissance team twice in 2 days, unless the team was never the real target? The second contact came before sunrise. The sky was still that strange color between black and blue when the first shot cracked across the ridge. This time it wasn't a single sniper. It was coordinated fire. 3 positions. Professional spacing. Captain Miles Hargrove felt the shift immediately. The rhythm of the engagement told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't harassment. This was containment. "Break north," he ordered over the radio. The team scattered into defensive positions along the rocky terrain east of the fob. But the shooters were already anticipating their movement. Rounds snapped across the rocks in disciplined bursts, forcing the team into separated cover. Briggs and 2 operators were pushed north. Webb and another operator slid into a shallow drainage cut to the south. Hargrove ended up behind a low ridge beside Sloan Carter. Cody Marsh was with them, and Marsh had already been wounded once the previous day. When the next round came in, it grazed his left shoulder. The impact spun him sideways into the dirt. "Damn it," Briggs muttered over comms. Sloan was already at Marsh's side again. Her hands pressed a hemostatic dressing into the wound before the pain had fully reached his brain. "Look at me," she said calmly. Marsh forced his eyes open. "I'm good," he said weakly. "You're not good," she replied quietly. "But you're alive." She wrapped the secondary pressure bandage and placed his own hand over it. "Hold exactly there, don't move." Gunfire cracked again from the north ridge. The shooters had elevation and distance. Hargrove listened to the echoes, judged the timing. 1,100 meters, he muttered. Maybe a little more. Whoever they were skilled and patient. Another flash appeared on the slope above them. Sloan saw it too. "North shooter," she said. "Primary." Wind moved through the valley in long, cold gusts. Stronger than the day before. 12 to 14 knots. At 1,100 meters, that wind could throw a bullet several feet off course. Hargrove looked down at the rifle in his hands. Webb's M24. He had taken it before patrol, after reviewing the strange intelligence reports from the night before. He turned toward Sloan. She still had one hand pressed to Marsh's shoulder wound, watching the blood saturation carefully. "You see him?" Hargrove asked. She nodded once. "Yes." "Range?" "About 1150. He held the rifle toward her. Sloan looked at it, then back at Marsh. 20 seconds, she said. She reinforced the dressing quickly. Placed Marsh's hand exactly where the pressure needed to stay. "Do not move your hand," she told him. "Even if it hurts." He nodded. She took the rifle. 15 meters away, 2 rock formations created a narrow, natural V-shaped opening. Not perfect, but stable enough. She moved fast, crouching low across the stones. A sharp fragment cut across her shoulder as she slid into position. She ignored it. Her body settled into the awkward angle the rocks forced on her. Right side down. Not ideal for a right-handed shooter, but workable. Her father's lessons returned like echoes through time. You don't wait for perfect positions. You create the best shot available. Sloan breathed slowly. The scope picture steadied. 1150 meters. Wind shifting. The gust cycle repeated roughly every 80 seconds. She watched the grass along the ridge. Watched the subtle patterns in the brush. Waited. Her breathing slowed. 4 seconds in. Hold. 8 seconds out. The wind paused. 3 seconds. That was the window. She squeezed. The rifle cracked. The recoil pressed gently into her shoulder. Far across the ridge, the muzzle flash disappeared. No second shot came back. She kept watching through the scope. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Nothing moved. The north ridge had gone silent. Sloane cycled the bolt slowly, still scanning. Then she lowered the rifle and returned to Marsh. "Pressure still there?" she asked. He nodded weakly. "Good." She checked his pulse again, color returning to his face slowly. He looked up at her with tired eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question surprised her. A wounded 24-year-old soldier asking about her. Sloane blinked once. "I'm fine." And she meant it. Hargrove stood nearby, holding the rifle now. His expression was thoughtful. Something inside his understanding had shifted. Webb approached from the south. He looked at the ridge, then at Sloane, then quietly said something almost under his breath. "Both hands." Briggs arrived seconds later from the northern position. He stopped a few feet away, stared at Sloane, then spoke in a low voice. 1,100 meters. He paused. Crosswind. Another pause. Non-dominant position. He wasn't asking a question. He was acknowledging a fact. Sloane didn't respond. She was already preparing Marsh for evacuation. "The tourniquet clock is running," she said. "We need to move him." Hargrove nodded. 2 minutes. The walk back to the fob was slower this time. Everyone stayed alert. But the shooters never fired again. When they reached the base, Sloane immediately began the tourniquet conversion procedure. She worked methodically, controlled bleeding, repacked the wound, checked blood pressure, wrote the numbers on Marsh's forearm again. When she finished, she gave him strict instructions. 4 hours without moving that leg. He nodded obediently. Only then did Sloane leave the room. 12 minutes later, she returned wearing her field pack, the titanium case under her arm. No one stopped her. She walked across the base calmly, like someone following a schedule she had already decided. 11 minutes later, she reached the old bunker entrance east of the facility. She went inside, down the concrete stairs. She set the titanium case on the floor, pulled out a small satellite device. The upload began. Encrypted. Irreversible once started. 4 hours and 22 minutes total transfer time. 94 minutes remained. She removed her prosthetic leg and set it beside her. Then she triggered the northeast perimeter sensor deliberately. An alarm that would bring the nearest response team. The SEAL recon element. Exactly 49 minutes later. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. But one variable had changed. The CIA team arrived 37 minutes earlier than she expected. Helicopters. 2 of them. Flying low through the river valley. Running dark. The sound reached the bunker only seconds before the perimeter alarms triggered. Inside the bunker, the SEAL team looked toward the stairwell. Sloane checked the time on the satellite device. 8 SAG personnel, she said calmly. And 1 senior officer. Hargrove frowned. "How do you know that?" "I've been monitoring their operational frequency since I arrived here." The room went quiet. The realization spread slowly among the operators. This had been building long before they arrived tonight. Nathan Reeves shifted at the back of the formation. The team's medic. He stepped forward toward Cody Marsh. But halfway there, he froze. His eyes locked onto Sloane's face. And suddenly, the past came crashing back. Bucharest, September 2021. A hotel room. A man in civilian clothes sliding a photograph across a table. Confirm this target. Reeves had nodded. Now the same woman sat 20 feet away. Alive. Looking directly at him. Sloane studied his face carefully. Then she spoke. You were in Bucharest. The room held its breath. September 2021, she continued quietly. A hotel room, someone showed you my picture. Reeves swallowed. I was told it was surveillance confirmation. You confirmed a lethal target, she replied. Not accusing. Just stating the truth. Reeves stared at the prosthetic leg beside her. The weight of realization crushed down on him. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't ask, Sloane said gently. The difference between those two things hung heavy in the room. Reeves slowly walked to the wall and sat down. Head in his hands. Processing the moment when partial truth becomes full responsibility. Hargrove watched silently. Because soldiers know something civilians rarely understand. Sometimes the line between guilt and deception is razor thin. And crossing it changes a person forever. Sloane didn't say anything else to him. There was no point. Truth had already done its work. At the stairwell, two figures appeared. Older men. Warren Holt and Marcus Decker. Both from a generation of warriors who carried history in their bones. Holt stepped into the room slowly. His eyes found Sloane immediately. He hadn't seen her since she was 3 years old. But he had watched her life from a distance for more than 2 decades. Because her father had asked him to. When Glenn Carter survived Iraq in 1991, Holt had been one of the first men he spoke to. He knew what Glenn had taken from that facility. He knew what it meant. And he had kept that secret for 30 years. Now he looked at Sloane. Carter, he said softly. She nodded once. Hull. Behind them, another figure descended the stairs. Silver hair. Cold eyes. Deputy Director Alan Cross. The CIA had arrived to collect something. But Sloane Carter had already decided how this night would end. And the truth her father carried out of the desert 30 years ago was about to become impossible to bury. Why would a powerful man bring 8 armed operatives to retrieve a single metal case, unless he feared what might already be inside it? The bunker grew quieter when Deputy Director Alan Cross stepped off the stairs. Power has a certain gravity to it. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet shift in the air when someone used to commanding rooms enters one. Cross moved slowly into the center of the bunker. 61 years old. Silver hair, clean posture, the calm composure of someone who had spent decades making decisions most people would never even hear about. 8 Special Activities Group operators spread along the perimeter behind him. Weapons lowered, but ready. Across the room, Captain Hargrove's SEAL team instinctively adjusted their positions. Not aggressive, just present. 2 groups of professionals standing inside a concrete room that suddenly felt too small for the truth about to surface. Cody Marsh sat against the eastern wall, leg elevated, shoulder wrapped tightly where Sloane had treated him. His face had regained some color, but he stayed very still. Because even at 24 years old, he understood something important was unfolding here. Sloane Carter remained seated on the floor, rifle across her lap, titanium case resting between her and the 2 groups of armed men. Her prosthetic leg lay beside her. Alan Cross stopped about 6 feet away. He looked down at the case, then back at Sloane. Miss Carter, he said calmly. Director Cross, she replied. The formality hung between them like an old habit neither had bothered to break. Cross nodded toward the case. "I'll need that." Sloane tilted her head slightly. "You're welcome to it." That answer made several people in the room glance at each other. Cross studied her carefully. "It contains government property." "It contains evidence," Sloane said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was simply precise. "The documentation of an unauthorized operation in January of 1991. She paused. 7 men died because of it. Cross didn't react immediately. He had spent 40 years learning not to react to information. But the slight tightening around his eyes was noticeable. "Your father held classified material for 21 years, Cross said. "He held proof of a crime," Sloane corrected. She looked directly at him now. The legal distinction between those two things matters. The bunker remained silent. Hargrove watched the exchange carefully. Not interrupting. Just observing. Cross glanced briefly around the room. He was doing the same calculation every experienced intelligence officer does when a situation becomes unpredictable. What can still be controlled? What cannot? "Your father was a careful man," Cross said. Sloane shook her head gently. "He was a correct man." Careful, she implied, had nothing to do with it. For several seconds no one spoke. Then Cross asked the question he had been waiting decades to ask. "The case." He nodded toward it. "Where is the documentation now?" Sloane rested her hand slowly on the prosthetic leg lying beside her. Several of the operators shifted slightly when they saw the motion. But she simply lifted the prosthetic and held it across her lap. 3 years ago, she began quietly, "I woke up in a German military hospital." She tapped the carbon fiber surface lightly. "With one leg missing." Her voice remained calm. But something deeper moved beneath it. The official report said motor vehicle accident. She looked at Reeves briefly across the room. The truth was less convenient. Reeves lowered his eyes. Sloane continued. "I realized something important while recovering." She rotated the prosthetic slowly in her hands. A prosthetic limb has considerably more internal space than most people realize. Cross's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Sloane went on. "The first thing I did after learning to walk again was visit a prosthetist in Nashville." She paused. "Former Army Ranger. He knew my father." Cross said nothing, but now he was listening very carefully. "I asked him to modify the internal structure," Sloane said, "to create a hidden compartment." She gently set the prosthetic back on the floor. Every document inside that titanium case was digitized and placed on an encrypted drive the size of a thumbnail. The room absorbed that slowly. "I've been carrying the entire evidentiary record of the Iraq mission. 6 inches from my body. Every day. For 2.5 years. She looked around the bunker calmly. "I walked through 14 security checkpoints with it. 2 CIA search procedures. No one thought to examine the prosthetic leg." Briggs exhaled softly through his nose. Not disbelief. More like reluctant respect. Across the room Webb murmured the same quiet words again. "Both hands." This time everyone understood what he meant. She healed with one hand. She fought with the other. And the truth had been carried by the same body the entire time. Alan Cross looked down at the prosthetic for several seconds. Then back at Sloane. "You're assuming that possession of this information protects you," he said. Sloane shook her head. "I'm not assuming anything." She tapped the small satellite device beside the case. "The data began uploading 4 hours ago." Cross's eyes flicked toward it. How long? 90 minutes when you arrived. She checked the screen briefly. Now closer to 50. Uploading where? Cross asked. Sloane met his gaze. To several places. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the implication. Redundant transmission. Once completed, the files would exist in multiple secure locations. Impossible to erase. Cross studied her again. You've planned this for a long time. My father planned it, she said softly. I finished it. The two older men near the stairwell stepped forward slightly. Warren Holt and Marcus Decker. Men from a generation that remembered the original mission. Holt's eyes rested on Sloane with something close to pride, because he had watched her grow up from the edges of her life. Just as Glenn Carter had asked. Cross noticed him. Recognition flickered briefly. Warren Holt, he said. Holt nodded. Still breathing. The two men shared a look that contained 30 years of history. Cross sighed quietly. Even if the files release, he said, the damage would be limited. Many of the individuals involved are no longer alive. That's true, Sloane said. But their decisions are. She gestured slightly toward Marsh. 7 men died in Iraq because someone wanted oil contracts signed early. Truth matters even when the guilty are old. Hargrove finally spoke. His voice calm. You exposed our position yesterday. It wasn't a question. Sloane nodded. Yes. To bring witnesses. Hargrove looked around at his team. Then back at her. You needed military personnel present when the truth surfaced. Yes. Why? Sloane held his gaze. Because soldiers understand sacrifice. Better than politicians. For a moment, something like quiet agreement moved through the SEAL team. Even Briggs didn't argue. The satellite device beeped softly. Upload progress continuing. Cross glanced at the screen again. Then back at Sloane. He could still order his men to take the device. Kill everyone in the bunker. Destroy the evidence. But the calculation had already changed. Too many witnesses. Too many unknown transmission points. Too late. He realized that before anyone else spoke. Slowly, Alan Cross straightened his jacket. He looked at the titanium case one last time. Then back at Sloane Carter. You carry your father's stubbornness, he said. Sloane didn't smile. I carry his truth. Cross nodded once. And for the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room had no move left on the board. Because sometimes power isn't defeated by force. Sometimes it's defeated by patience. And a daughter who refused to let 7 forgotten soldiers disappear into silence. Why would a man who had controlled secrets for 40 years suddenly choose silence? The bunker remained still after Sloane's last words. Even the air felt heavier. The small satellite device beside the titanium case blinked quietly, its progress bar crawling forward 1 percentage point at a time. 50 minutes left. 50 minutes before the truth Glenn Carter carried out of the Iraqi desert would exist in places no government could erase. Deputy Director Alan Cross stood motionless. He had spent most of his adult life inside rooms like this. Rooms where decisions shaped history quietly. Where operations began and ended without witnesses. But tonight felt different. Because this time the truth had witnesses. Too many. His eyes moved slowly around the bunker. Captain Hargrove and his SEAL team stood calmly, but firmly between Sloane and the CIA personnel. No weapons raised. Just presence. Professional. Solid. Cody Marsh leaned against the eastern wall, pale but alert. Nathan Reeves sat on the floor nearby, elbows on his knees, staring down at his hands like a man examining a part of himself he no longer recognized. Warren Holt and Marcus Decker waited near the stairwell. Two old soldiers who had seen enough history to understand the weight of the moment. And in the center of it all, Sloane Carter, sitting on the concrete floor, rifle resting across her lap, the prosthetic leg beside her, the truth inside it. Cross exhaled slowly. "Your father was a difficult man," he said. Sloane didn't respond immediately. She looked down at the prosthetic leg briefly, then back at him. "He was a patient man." Cross nodded faintly. Patience can look like stubbornness from the outside. Sloane tilted her head slightly. Sometimes stubbornness is just patience that refused to quit. For a moment, something almost like a smile flickered across Cross's face. Not friendly, more like recognition. Because men who live long enough in intelligence work learn to recognize their opposites. And Sloane Carter was something rare. Not reckless, not vengeful, just unwilling to let something stay buried. Cross walked slowly toward the titanium case. None of the SEAL operators moved, but their eyes followed him carefully. He crouched slightly, studying the scratches across the metal surface. 21 years Glenn Carter had protected this thing. 2.5 more inside his daughter's prosthetic. Cross spoke without looking up. "You know, the world isn't as simple as your father believed." Sloane's voice remained calm. He knew exactly how complicated it was. That's why he kept the evidence. Cross ran a finger lightly along the dented corner of the case. Governments make decisions in war that cannot survive public scrutiny. That doesn't make them crimes. Sloane didn't raise her voice, but something stronger entered it. 7 soldiers died because someone wanted oil contracts early. That's not war. That's profit. Silence returned, because no one in the room could honestly argue the point. After a moment, Cross stood again. He looked at Warren Holt. "You kept this secret 30 years. Holt shrugged slightly. "A friend asked me to. That's all." Holt met his eyes. "That's enough." Cross nodded slowly. He understood that answer better than anyone. Loyalty between soldiers often outruns loyalty to institutions. That simple truth had shaped more history than most intelligence reports ever would. The satellite device beeped again. 42 minutes remaining. Across the room, Briggs shifted his weight. He looked at Sloane. "You knew we'd come." She nodded. "Yes." "You triggered the perimeter sensor." "Yes." Briggs frowned slightly. "You trusted us." It sounded almost like a question. Sloane looked around at the SEAL team, then back at him. "I trusted that soldiers would recognize the truth when they saw it." Briggs crossed his arms slowly. "And if we did?" Sloane shrugged lightly. "Then the upload would still finish." A quiet laugh escaped Webb. Low, dry, because he understood the elegance of the plan. No matter what happened in this bunker, the truth was already escaping. Captain Hargrove stepped closer to Sloane. "You could have released it anonymously." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Sloane looked at the rifle across her lap, then at the photograph she kept folded inside the titanium case. 8 men in desert uniforms. One of them her father. "Because truth shouldn't hide forever," she said softly. Hargrove nodded once. He understood that answer too. Cross watched the exchange carefully. Then he turned toward the stairwell. His 8 SAG operators remained ready, waiting for an order that hadn't come. For the first time in decades, Alan Cross found himself standing in a situation he could not control. Too many witnesses, too many variables, too much truth already moving beyond his reach. He looked back at Sloane Carter one last time. History will not remember this the way you hope. Sloane didn't argue. She simply said something that made the room feel quieter. History rarely remembers anything correctly. But truth still matters. Another minute passed. 38 minutes remaining. Nathan Reeves finally spoke from the wall. His voice sounded older than it had an hour ago. "What happens to you after this?" Sloane looked at him calmly. "I don't know. And you're okay with that?" She considered the question, then nodded. "My father carried this truth for 21 years. She touched the prosthetic gently. "I carried it for 3. That's long enough." Reeves looked down again. Because guilt sometimes arrives slowly. But when it arrives, it stays. Near the stairwell, Warren Holt checked his watch. Then looked at Sloane. "Your father would be proud of you." Sloane didn't answer, but her eyes softened slightly. Not pride. Something quieter. Relief. Because after years of preparation, the burden was almost finished. 32 minutes remaining. Alan Cross glanced once more at the device. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped back. Away from the case. Away from Sloane. Away from the truth he had spent 3 decades hoping would never surface. The CIA operators looked at him uncertainly. Waiting. But Cross gave no order. He simply stood there, silent, watching the countdown. Because sometimes even powerful men recognize the moment when fighting becomes pointless. And in those rare moments, the only thing left to do is witness what comes next. What happens when the truth finally arrives and no one can stop it. The bunker had grown quiet in a way that only places filled with history become quiet. Not peaceful, just heavy. The satellite device beside the titanium case blinked again. 20 minutes remaining. No one had moved much in the last half hour. The CIA operators stood along the walls like shadows, their posture still alert but no longer aggressive. Captain Hargrove's team remained between them and Sloane Carter. No orders had been spoken. No weapons raised. Just a silent agreement that something bigger than any one of them was unfolding. Cody Marsh shifted slightly against the wall, careful not to disturb the bandages around his shoulder. His voice was softer now. "Never thought my worst patrol would end like this." Briggs glanced at him. "You got shot twice." Marsh managed a faint smile. "Yeah." He nodded toward Sloane. "But at least we had the right medic." Sloane didn't look up. She was watching the small screen of the satellite device. 16 minutes. Nathan Reeves finally stood from the wall. Slowly, like a man carrying extra weight inside his chest. He walked a few steps toward Sloane and stopped. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The words weren't dramatic. They were simple, honest, and heavy. Sloane studied his face for a moment. "I know," she said. "You didn't ask questions." Reeves nodded. "That's the problem." For years he had believed obedience was part of the job. But tonight he had learned something uncomfortable. Sometimes obedience hides things that should never stay hidden. Sloane didn't punish him with more words. She simply said something that surprised him. "Make sure you ask next time." Reeves blinked once. Because forgiveness, when it arrives without anger, often hurts more than blame. He stepped back quietly. Warren Holt leaned against the stairwell railing. Watching Sloane the way A man watches the end of a long journey. He remembered Glenn Carter sitting across from him in 1993. Younger then, still strong, holding the photograph of 8 men in the desert sun. "If something happens to me," Glenn had said, "make sure she gets the chance to finish it." Holt had kept that promise for 30 years. And now the end of that promise sat 10 feet away from him on a concrete floor. 10 minutes remaining. Deputy Director Alan Cross checked his watch. For the first time that night, he looked tired. Not defeated. Just older. He had spent 4 decades inside a system built on secrecy. He knew better than anyone that systems survive by controlling stories. But tonight the story had escaped. And he knew it. Captain Hargrove approached Sloane quietly. "You're certain the upload is redundant?" She nodded. 5 separate nodes. Locations. She gave a small shrug. Places that don't erase files easily. Hargrove almost smiled. That was enough of an answer. Across the room, Webb looked down at the prosthetic leg resting beside Sloane. Then back at her. "You walked through security carrying all that?" "Yes." "Didn't scare you?" Sloane thought about it. "Every day. Why keep doing it?" She answered without hesitation. "Because my father carried it longer." Webb nodded slowly. There was nothing more to add to that. 5 minutes. The blinking light on the satellite device felt louder now, even though it made almost no sound. Everyone in the room understood the same thing. History was about to shift quietly. No explosions. No gunfire. Just information moving through the world faster than anyone could stop. Deputy Director Cross stepped closer to Sloane one last time. His voice was calm again. "You realize what happens next?" "Yes." "There will be investigations." "Yes." "People will lose careers." Sloane met his eyes. 7 men lost their lives. Cross didn't argue. He simply nodded once. Because sometimes even the people who built the system recognize when the math no longer works. 2 minutes. Cody Marsh leaned his head back against the wall. "You know," he muttered quietly, "this is the strangest mission debrief I've ever been part of." Briggs snorted softly. "Just stay alive, kid." Marsh looked toward Sloane. "Was your dad really Delta?" She nodded once. "He taught you all that shooting?" "Yes." Marsh smiled faintly. "Good teacher." Sloane's eyes softened slightly. "The best." 30 seconds. Everyone in the bunker looked at the small device now. Even the CIA operators. Because no matter which side they stood on, they understood they were witnessing the end of a secret. 10 seconds. The progress bar reached its final line. 5, 4, 3, 2. The device beeped. Upload complete. No celebration followed. No cheers. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when something heavy has finally been set down. Sloane Carter exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, the truth no longer lived inside her body. It belonged to the world now. Deputy Director Cross looked at the screen. Then at Sloane. "You've changed a great many lives tonight." Sloane picked up the prosthetic leg and held it for a moment. Then she said something that sounded almost like a whisper. "My father carried the weight of 7 men for 30 years." She attached the prosthetic carefully. Stood up. Balanced easily. "I just made sure the world knew why." Warren Holt straightened near the stairwell. "Your father would say the job done." Sloane nodded. "Yes." She looked around the bunker one last time. At the soldiers. The witnesses. The quiet room where truth had finally surfaced. Then she slung the Remington rifle over her shoulder and lifted the titanium case. No one tried to stop her as she walked toward the stairs, because there was nothing left to stop. Behind her, the bunker remained still. 6 SEAL operators, 8 CIA agents, 2 old veterans, and 1 powerful official who understood something important at last. Sometimes the strongest weapon in the world is not a gun, not power, not secrecy. Sometimes the strongest weapon is a single person who refuses to let the truth disappear. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.